On in an unusual place. I'm live streaming from YouTube tonight. I'm redoing a video that I did earlier this week about biblical marriage. I did that video on Facebook, and I had a really great connection starting off, all the way through, really. And I don't really have an explanation for it, but the audio got really wonky and the video just went south and became unsalvageable. I even tried to edit it and post, clean it up, and just it was impossible. So several people expressed interest in having me redo it, that I was onto something, they thought, and it would be worth a redo so I could actually come to my conclusion with all the scripture to back it up. So I'm going to try that tonight, but I'm also experimenting. This is the first time doing this on YouTube on my mobile. Historically, I have done that on YouTube on my laptop. So we'll see how this goes. Hopefully this will be all right. We're talking about biblical marriage. And I'm going to spend approximately zero time talking about gender roles. I'm not going to be talking about the role of a man and the role of a woman, domestic duties and provision and all of that kind of stuff. You know, I'm not going to be talking about patriarchy and matriarchy and masculinism and feminism and all of these things. I'm going to distill this down as simply as I can, because I believe that it really is that simple. You know, you may not believe this, but when I woke up this morning, I was a man. It's true. I was. I didn't have to go on YouTube and watch podcasts to explain to me what my role is as a man. I didn't have to do any of that. I just woke up and I was a man. And I went about my day and everything I did was kind of manly. Imagine that, right? So the gender roles take care of themselves if we have the right framework to exercise them in. And we're going to be talking about that framework today. Now, I'm going to start off in Ephesians 5 to kind of lay the groundwork. This is kind of the whole hierarchy that we talk about when we talk about men, women, Messiah. You know, that vertical top-down hierarchy. Who serves who and why? Oh, spoiler alert. I just said a word there that's going to be key to what we're talking about here later. Now, if you saw the live stream earlier, you already know where this is going. But anyway, so we're going to read Ephesians 5, and let's start reading in verse 22. Now, my Zondervan New American Standard here has a heading that says Marriage Like Christ and the Church. Okay, so Paul is going to be making a connection, husband, wife, Christ, church. That's what he's riffing on here. Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. Well, I got to stop right there. There are guys out there who, some of you guys may think I'm joking and that I'm not being serious here, but I've encountered this. There are guys out there who would insist that Abraham, because he was called Lord or Master by his wife Sarah, that their wives also call them Lord or Master. And this is one of the proof texts they use to back that up as well. Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. Okay, so I'm the husband, therefore I'm the Lord of my wife. We're going to kind of debunk that as we go through here. For the husband is head of the wife, as Christ also is head of the church, or the assembly, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be subject to their husbands in everything. Now just pause here real quick. He's assuming a relationship between Christ and his church or his assembly is like the relationship of a husband and a wife. Now, does Christ give the church, the assembly, a good reason to submit to him? Yeah, he kind of does. He takes care of all of our spiritual needs, even physical provisions. There's love. There's all of these things that a woman needs. And he provides that to the church in an analogous way. So, right off the bat, if you're a husband and you want your wife to be subject to you, you need to make sure that you're worthy of being subjected to. There's a whole lot of Ahabs out there calling themselves their wives Jezebels. You know, there's a whole lot of men out there insisting that their wives be Proverbs 31 women when they're not even working on being a Psalm 1 man. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's hypocrisy. Okay? So we don't get to demand our wives submit to us unless we give them a good reason to. Just waking up and having a Y chromosome isn't good enough. But let's keep going. Verse 25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify or make holy her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word. We're going to talk about that water thing here in a little bit. That he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. Now imagine this, husbands. Are you holy and blameless? Because remember, the whole thing is, our wives are supposed to subject themselves to us. We're supposed to love them. That's the whole thing here. So if we're equally yoked and our headship over our wives is supposed to cause them to be holy and blameless, shouldn't we be holy and blameless ourselves? So again, men, turn the mirror on yourselves. Are you endeavoring to be holy and blameless? If the answer is no, maybe you shouldn't worry so much about your wife submitting to you. Okay, get your own internal house in order first, right? Okay. Verse 28, so husbands ought to also love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church. That's pretty self-explanatory, right? Because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother, and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, quoting Genesis. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife, even as himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. Now, there's a growing strain of thought that, based on scriptures like this and just kind of some kind of weird logic, that men are only supposed to love their wives. Men don't have to respect their wives. They just need to love them, right? Women need love. Men need respect. Men don't need our wives to love us. They just need to respect us, right? And that's a bunch of hogwash. Because in any type of relationship, I mean, just think about it. We're talking about Christ and the church, right? So Christ loves the church. The church respects him, right? Do we not love him? Imagine, as a Christian, as a believer, imagine a relationship with the Messiah where you respect him, but you don't love him, right? Or imagine a relationship between him and you where he loves you, but he doesn't respect you. Now, we know the scripture talks about God as no respecter of persons. He's talking about biases there. We're not talking about that type of respect, okay? So he does, on a basic level, on a how do I say it, a more familial, intimate level, respect his bride. Okay, so this whole business of men don't need love, we need respect, and women don't need respect, they need love, it's a bunch of hooey. Okay, but I'm going to take us into a couple scriptures here to unpack this. And like I said the other night, these are scriptures that if I asked the average person, if I just presented these scriptures just in a vacuum with no heading, no subject, and I said, what do you think I'm going to teach on? Pretty much nobody is going to guess biblical marriage. Okay? You'll see what I mean as we go through. We're going to go to Genesis 18. And we're going to start reading in verse 1. This is when Yahweh and the two angels come to visit Abraham. Abraham makes a nice lunch for them, and they have a nice, meal under the tree. So Yahweh appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. Now remember, Abraham is a husband to a wife in the physical, right? In the spiritual, he represents the church or the assembly. We're all supposed to be sons of Abraham by faith, right? Paul talks about descendants of Abraham, heirs according to the promise by faith. He talks about it in Galatians, right? So Abraham is simultaneously a husband to a human wife, but he also, relationally to God, to Yahweh, or to Yahshua, there is an equal sign, which is really important to understanding this. He is the church. He is the assembly. He represents us relationally, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's kind of abstract. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Let's pause real quick. Men. We're supposed to love our wives as the Messiah loves the church, right? And as men, we know, we have this idea that Christ is the head of the man and the man is the head of the woman, right? If we're going to say that the Messiah, that we're going to say Yahshua, or in your English, you'll say Jesus. If we're going to say he is God, or if we're going to say he is Yahweh, which there's enough smoke there that there's a fire. Okay, I know that there's debate on the Godhead and sonship and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to really get into that. When I go to Jeremiah 31 and I see that he who scattered Israel will gather him again, and then I go to John and I see the Messiah saying that he's going to be the one that does that, that puts a pretty big fat equal sign. Okay, Stephen, in his testimony before he's stoned to death, makes the connection that it was the Messiah who was speaking through the burning bush. It was him that they were dealing with in the wilderness. He says, anyway, I could just launch off on that, but let's keep it concise, James. Let's keep it on track. All right. So, but the important thing here in verse 2 is that Abraham sees Yahweh coming towards him. There's something about this. He immediately recognizes the authority of Yahweh. And what does he do? He takes action. He runs to meet them, and he bows himself to the earth. And he calls himself your servant. He refers to himself as the servant of Yahweh. And everything he's about to do is part of that servitude. Okay, so here's the question for the men. You can tell by now this is largely directed at the men. Are you serving Yahweh with this same type of rigor, with this same type of vigor? Are you actually worshiping? Are you actually willing to drop everything you do in servitude to him? If the answer is no, there's some things to think about. Verse 4, please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, so do as you have said. Now, well, I'll pause here, then I'll just keep reading. But we're going to pause. Now, it doesn't say. This is a speculation on my part, and I try to be honest when I'm speculating. It doesn't say that Abraham washed Yahweh's feet. He gave the order to have the water prepared for that to happen. Now, with him having servants, it's very possible that he could have ordered them to wash Yahweh's feet. But based on how he postured himself earlier, based on how he presented himself earlier as their servant, I think there's a 99.9% chance that he was the one that actually washed Yahweh's feet. It just makes sense. Okay? Now, the whole teaching here hinges on that being true. Okay? But I think that there's enough there to where we can make this point. He is serving Yahweh. He is posturing himself as a servant of Yahweh. Now remember, Abraham represents the church relative to the Messiah. Okay? And he is also a husband. Husbands are supposed to serve Messiah. They're supposed to serve Yahweh. Right? So, the next thing he does here, let's go to verse 6. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly, prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. Just a brief aside, this is 3 Measures Ministry. I'm putting out a series on the gospel called 3 Measures of Good News. I got the first part out on the channel, and I'm going to be recording subsequent parts and rounding it out. It's several hours worth of material. I'm not going to bang it out in one shot. I've tried, and it's just too tedious. So we're going to do it in smaller chunks. But keep an eye on the channel. Those will be coming. I don't have dates, but they'll be coming out hopefully within the next couple of weeks. So he goes to Sarah, and he says, quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. Okay? So at this point, there's no evidence that Sarah said, no, I'm an independent feminist woman. You know, any of this stuff that women get accused of being, right? What does she do? She submits herself to Abraham, her husband, like Paul talks about in Ephesians. She's going to do what he said to do. But the question is, why? Why? Is it because he's got a Y chromosome? Or is there something bigger than that? Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and as he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Okay, so I'm just gonna, that's enough to read for now. So the idea here is that he goes to Sarah and he gives her an assignment. She's gonna help with meal prep. And it's quick. This is on the fly. They weren't expecting these visitors, right? And these aren't just any visitors. This is Yahweh. This is kind of a big deal, right? So Yahweh comes on the scene. Abraham prostrates himself and presents himself as a servant. And he immediately goes into servant mode. He's washing Yahweh's feet. He's ordering a meal. He actually goes out and grabs the livestock himself. Okay, so he's participating in this. He's not just overseeing it as some domineering lord, right? And he goes to Sarah and he tells her to participate, and she does. So we have what we see in Ephesians. We have top down. We have Yahweh, Abraham, Sarah. We go to Ephesians, what do we have? We have Christ or Messiah, husband, wife, right? Now the linchpin to this here is the man. We're going to see as we go to John here later. The man has a duty to serve vertically, like above him, and vertically below him. Okay? So let's go ahead and read that. Let's go to John 13. This is the Last Supper. And we'll start reading at verse 5. This is talking about the Messiah and his disciples. This is after they ate. Then he poured water into the basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Now, this is kind of a big deal, right? We just read Abraham. Abraham was washing the feet of Yahweh in the flesh, which I believe was a pre-incarnate Yahshua, right? Same person. Here we have that same person that had his feet washed by Abraham he's washing the disciples' feet, right? And not only that, he's using the towel. He took off his clothes and he put himself on a towel. So whatever clothes he was wearing, he took them off and he put on a towel. Like, this is bare bones, bottom of the barrel servitude. As I understand it culturally, if you had a house with any level of servants, even if it's just one servant, the servant, there was a servant like at the bottom of the ladder. And his or her job was to wash the feet, because you're walking around in sandals all day. You're not walking around in Nikes, and whatever. You're actually wearing sandals all day, and your feet are filthy by the time you get home. When you come into a building, your feet are gross, right? It's the servant's job to actually wash the feet of the guests that are coming in. Now, that's a gross job. Imagine if we had a church today where, you went to this church and the pastor said, hey, today you're washing feet. And you look over there and you see this dirty, gross water in a bin, and you see people coming in with dirty, gross feet. You're like, really? A lot of people would walk out of that church because their egos wouldn't let them do that. Obviously, that's a problem with the human heart, right? We all tend to be that way if we let ourselves. So he came to Simon Peter and he said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Yahshua, or Jesus, answered and said to him, what I do to you, you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. Yahshua answered and said, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Let's just pause and think about that here. This is the Messiah washing the feet of his disciples. Who do his disciples represent? They represent the assembly or the church, right? He's washing their feet. In a marriage, who represents the church? The wife. So if he were to be in the role of a husband here, whose feet would he be washing? He would be washing his wife's feet. Think about that. Let's keep going. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Yahshua said to him, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew the one that was betraying him. For this reason he said, not all of you are clean. When he washed their feet and had taken his garments and reclined at the table again, so he stepped out of his, because he has been their master. He's their teacher, right? He stepped out of that role and he put on the garb of a servant, and he did this lowly, disgusting, gross thing to his disciples. Now he's putting on his garments and he's stepping back into his role as master. So here, right again here, if you want to be the head of a household as a man, we have the model here. We have the prototype. You know, you can't just have this I'm the master, I'm the boss mode 24/7. You've got to be able to switch into servant mode with your wife. Tell that to Andrew Tate. Okay, so he washed their feet, he took his garments, and he reclined at the table again. He said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, master? You are right, for so I am." Kind of like how Sarah called Abraham Lord, right? "If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you ought to also wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you should also do as I did for you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who was sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." Hallelujah. So the point I'm making here, speaking to the men. Now, is there any instance here, where the wife, the woman, washed the husband's feet? You could say yes, there is. Abraham. Relative to Yahweh, Abraham was like a stand-in for us. And he washed Yahweh's feet. Okay, he represents the church, he represents the assembly. But in that role, in the physical, he was also a husband. So as a husband, he was washing the feet of the master, who turned around later and demonstrated that as the master, you wash the feet of your wife. So the point with this, it's beyond gender roles. It's much more simple than that. It's about service. The Messiah, Yahshua, even going up to Yahweh the Father, gives us valid reasons to want to serve him. Abraham had valid reasons to want to serve him and wash his feet when he came to visit. Nobody had to compel or twist his arm or put a gun to his head and make him do it. He saw the intrinsic value in serving Yahweh. There's no indication that Sarah had to be forced to serve Abraham. Why? Because she's watching Abraham serve Yahweh. She sees the value in that, and she realizes that by serving Abraham, who is serving Yahweh, guess who she's also serving, right? But then we also see Abraham represents the assembly, right? He represents the husband, and he's like a dual role. It's like everything is wrapped up in him. So hopefully you're following along, because this is abstract. Granted, I understand. Abraham is washing Yahweh's feet, and he's washing his wife's feet. If we play this whole thing in Ephesians 5, this whole equal sign between Yahshua and the church and a husband and his wife, and we look at this whole encounter with Yahweh, with Abraham, with Sarah, and we extrapolate that out to what are we looking at, as far as the allegory here. Abraham is washing two sets of feet. And guess who's not washing his feet? There's no indication here that his wife washed his feet. Right? I mean, she could, but there's no indication in the text, in this whole back and forth thing. And so where I'm going with this, every marriage has a different dynamic because it's got two different people who are unique. To do this one-size-fits-all model of, how to be a good man, how to be a biblical husband. You see books on this, videos, podcasts. How to be a Proverbs 31 woman. Well, first off, to be a true Proverbs 30 woman, you need servants, right? So these men that insist that their wives are Proverbs 31 women, you might kind of think about maybe equipping her to where she could be that. A lot of women feel an undue amount of pressure because they're looking at the Proverbs 31 woman and they're like, I'm not anywhere close to this. And they feel like failures. And a lot of the times their husbands will reinforce that. It's top down. Men, give your wife a reason to submit to you besides the fact that you have parts. Show your wife what it looks like to serve the Most High yourself. Show your wife what it looks like to submit to his authority unquestioningly, instantly, on the spot, bam, down on my face. Yes, master. Show your wife what that looks like every single day. Let her watch you walk in that space. If you're not walking in that space, you have no business demanding that your wife also walk in that space. None. If Abraham was sitting around doing everything but serving Yahweh, but reveling in his manhood, Sarah has no reason to obey him, just intrinsically, on a spiritual level. Because remember, the whole thing is a spiritual allegory, right? Give your wives a reason besides your DNA. It's really that simple. If a man's not serving, maybe he should reconsider demanding service. If a man isn't willing to wash feet, he has no business demanding his own feet to be washed. A lot of men need to learn this lesson. I can say this from experience. Look, and I'm just going to call it like it is. Think of it what you will. I have an incredible marriage. My marriage is solid and stable. It has longevity because I serve my Creator to the best of my abilities, but I also serve my wife. And she sees it, and she responds, and she serves me. And in response, she's serving Yahweh. It works out. It's not that radical. We don't spend any time thinking about what our roles are as far as husband and wife and gender and domestic duties. We just get stuff done. If there's a sink full of dishes and I'm standing there, I get some water in the sink and bang them out. It's not rocket science. You know, it's really not. If there's a bug that needs to be squished, which is a man's job, right? She'll squish the bug. That's kind of a silly example, but it's just the idea that when things need to be done, we don't hem-haw back and forth about gender roles. Oh, you're the man, that's your job, you do it. Oh, you're the woman, you do not. We just get it done. Either individually, whoever's available, whoever's convenient at the moment, or we work together. And the whole time, I, as the man, am trying to make sure that I am directing my service to Yahweh while serving my wife. If I was to take any one of those two out, we're really not any different from the world. The world has its own views on how marriage is. Secular world, you know, the other religions, etc., etc. But men, when you serve your wife, and a lot of you will be like, oh, he's speaking like a Jezebel. Oh, he's whooped. That's your pride. That's your ego talking. If you're not willing to humble yourself and serve others, even your own wife, then we're not following the example of the Messiah. And guess who else sees that? Our kids. So if we're trying to raise our kids in any kind of faith and we're not modeling servitude to them, we're setting them up, but not in a good way. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully that all made sense. It's not groundbreaking. It's not rocket science. It's bedrock simple. But it's also profound. Serve, 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 serve. Period. Full stop. End of discussion. Without that servitude, men, Don't demand servitude. We'll see how this turned out. I love you guys. As always, thank you for tuning in, and Yahweh bless. How do I turn this off?